Okay, so let's proceed. Okay, so these are some norms. So before we get started, just to explain a little bit about how the format will be as we move on and before Ms. Ferrara begins her presentation. So you'll see in your screen some norms in English and in Spanish. The presentation will be a webinar format. For those of you who have never attended a webinar format, this is what you will see on your screen. It will be the facilitator, and in this case, our interpreters as well. Also, the panelists will try to answer as many questions as possible throughout the presentation. Microphones of all attendees will be muted unless the attendees raise their hand to ask their question live. And I will get into that in a little bit, just explain that a little bit further. Also, session will be recorded and posted in the district website, the YouTube page. And again, we listed the information here in Spanish, but we know our interpreters are providing this information. Okay, and then here we have two icons that we plan to use for this presentation. You'll see the Q&A, that's Q&A. If you press Q&A, you will be able to write in your question, and you can write it in English or in Spanish. If you write it in Spanish, I will be able to read it in Spanish out loud, and then I will go ahead and translate it in English for Ms. Ferrara. If you prefer to ask your question live and not write it in the Q&A, you can do that as well. So you'll see the little hand at the very bottom, and you'll see raise hand. You can go ahead and press raise hand. And what will happen is your screen, your video will show on the screen. And then we will go ahead and ask you to unmute yourself. And then we will ask you to move forward to ask your question live. Okay. And so we are not able to unmute you. You're the only one that can unmute yourself. And then finally, the chat. The chat is not available right now. It will be available for anything that we might go ahead and share with you. So we will go ahead and write in a question or a link that we will have you complete later. It's actually an evaluation, just a feedback form that we would like to hear from you, just a few questions, less than 10. So that way we can improve on our workshops, but that we can also learn about what might be some other topics that you might be interested in. Okay. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing now, and I will have Penny, if you can go ahead and share your screen, and you can get started.
Okay. So I am really glad to be here. This is something that is near and dear to me with children and mental health. I actually, my job at NAMI, which is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, is to go into the school systems, junior high and high schools, and talk about mental illnesses, talk about the signs and symptoms, about stigma, about suicide, and just to kind of open up the conversation. So tonight, I was really glad that Janet asked me to talk about this because I think it's a really timely topic, especially since what everyone has gone through during COVID. There's been such an increase in the numbers of children reporting with anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. So I thought this would be a good topic. So in talking with your child about mental health, you know, it can be really hard to talk about. It can be really hard for parents to deal with in dealing with a child because there's a lot of stigma. There are a lot of negative associations with people with mental illness. And there can be a lack of information and also as a parent or a guardian, a fear of being blamed. So one of the things that I think is most important at the beginning is to talk about a mental health problem like a mental illness as any other medical problem. So if you talked about the fact that, you know, mental illnesses are physical, they happen to take place in the brain, so you can't see it. But talk about how if someone has asthma, you know, their airways may fill up, they won't be able to breathe, their chest may tighten. Those are all things due to a physical illness. Mental illnesses, you know, that's due to the lungs. Mental illnesses, it's in the brain. And just to remember that, you know, it's a brain imbalance. We have chemicals in our brain that affect everything, how we think, how we act, how we behave, how we feel. So when one or more of those chemicals is not in balance, that's when you can see issues with the mental illness. It's genetic. It doesn't mean if someone, you know, a grandmother or a parent has a mental illness that you will. It just means that there could be a possibility. So it's always good to know your family medical history. And there's a trigger. So you've got these things set up in your brain, and something in your environment happens that is traumatic to you. And that's when you can kind of see these symptoms bubble up. So like I said, the brain is the central headquarter of the body, and it can sometimes get knocked off balance. But there's treatment to manage the illness, just like, you know, there's no cure for mental illness. There's no cure for many illnesses. You know, diabetes is an illness where it's managed, whether it's through medication or insulin or diet or exercise. The same thing goes for a mental illness. There's treatment to manage it and to live a good life. Some people need medication, some need therapy, but there are positive coping skills that you can use to be able to stay well. So just so that people are aware, you know, I do this all the time. I just did it yesterday with kids. You know, I think if I were with you in front of you and I would say, how many people have ever felt depressed? Basically, I think all the hands would go up. And, you know, there's a difference between a situation and feeling depressed over something. And sometimes it takes a while to get beyond it. And you may even need to reach out for help. But that can eventually pass. What we're talking about is with major depression is feeling like everything is just too much, too overwhelming. People tend to want to isolate. When you know, a psychiatrist might ask someone with depression, what things did you like to do? And you actually have a problem remembering anything positive or anything good. So there's a difference between, you know, and with the mental health issue, you can always think about, well, you know, is someone's behavior changing? Do you feel like something's off? Is it lasting for at least 2 weeks and building in intensity so that it's affecting the person's life? You know, with anxiety, you know, I think everyone, we always ask, you know, do people feel anxious, giving a presentation in front of the class, taking a test? Yeah, most people do. But usually when you're done with the activity, you kind of take a deep breath and that feeling goes away. Well, with an anxiety disorder, it doesn't. And you have that feeling of dread, or, you know, maybe a racing heart, shortness of breath, but it's a feeling that sometimes it doesn't even mean it's from something. You don't even know where it's coming from. You know, bipolar disorder, a lot of...
En el desorden polar,
Oh, bipolar disorder.
sí, ¿qué significa? Sí, bipolar, ¿no? Desorden bipolar, esta es la segunda.
Mm-hmm. There's
Y que
there's depression, and there's also that extreme high, that increased activity, decreased sleep, that real high of like happiness, but it's not real. And so that's something that you could notice in someone. These things can happen in children as young as 4 and 5. So this isn't something that just happens to adults. OCD is something that I think people know something about, but this talks about, a lot of us have tendencies to obsess about things or want to be really clean or orderly. This gets to a point though where it can interfere with your life in a way that it's just taking you so much time to try to deal with these obsessions, these thoughts that get into your head that you're not making yourself think of. And the compulsion is doing something to avoid feeling that, to hopefully relieve the anxiety. But it's just like on a wheel, it just keeps going and going like a hamster wheel. With schizophrenia, that's a thought disorder, and someone can experience a psychotic episode, which is basically the person is not dealing in reality. So they may be thinking a lot of illogical thoughts, feeling paranoid, so being afraid of things that aren't necessarily there, that aren't real, maybe seeing things that aren't there, hearing voices. Those are things that I work with someone who exhibited that when he was in elementary school, but no one really knew much about it. So he was kind of got passed by as a problem kid, but he would actually pull the fire alarm because his voice told him to do so, and not realize he did it until he saw everyone coming out. So you can definitely see these things in young people. And then of course, PTSD. So if you're trying to deal with talking to a child about a mental health issue, the best thing to do is to give a real life example. So this kind of talking about anxiety, like I said, so if you're, you walk across the street, a car is about to hit you, you're scared, you jump out of the way, you'd be breathing too fast. All of this is a normal reaction. It's called fight or flight. It's a normal reaction to a threat of danger. But with anxiety, you can get it so that you have a panic attack and feel literally like you're dying, like you're having a heart attack. And you can feel the same way you would if a car was about to hit you, but there may be no physical danger present, but that's kind of how your body is reacting. The best thing to do is to really listen and validate someone's experience. The biggest thing, and kids are always thinking this automatically, it's my fault. Kids are often embarrassed to talk about what's bothering them. And a lot of it has to do with a fear of what others might think. Parents, friends, even talking to someone at school, a social worker, they're afraid. They're afraid to talk about it. So we want to try to normalize the conversation, because half of people who are diagnosed children don't get help. And that's a sad thing. So basically, when you're talking to your child and asking them questions, I know this sounds very, well, of course we would listen, but there's a difference between hearing what they're saying and listening and being curious about it and asking questions. Empathize with them. And I think a lot of people have a problem with this because we as parents or caregivers want to fix the problem. Maybe we feel guilty. It's our fault, or we don't like seeing our children hurt, so we want to hurry up and fix it. But what you really need to do is empathize, and empathizing is not just feeling sorry for, it's feeling with. So when you empathize, you really have to go to a place in yourself where you felt vulnerable, where maybe you felt some of these feelings, and you have to be able to connect that way. The last thing too is to emphasize their strengths, what they do well, what they feel good about, what you notice about what makes them feel good about themselves. Like I said, keeping the conversations open. It's not one conversation that you're going to have. This is an ongoing thing. And, one of the things with mental health conditions is that they can come and go, which is called intermittent. So that there are times in someone's life that they may be doing well, and they may be on medication or in therapy and managing it well. And sometimes even with that, an event can happen, something that produces a trauma in them, and symptoms may come back, more in full force. So those things can happen. So that's why it's important to just keep the channels open, ask them about their emotions, and I think one of the things that is important to know is to try not to ask yes and no questions, to try to ask something where they may have to give you more of an answer, not just how was your day? What did you do today? What's one thing you learned? Or how did you feel? Try to elicit more. The other thing, when you're asking a question, saying something like, well, you're not feeling anxious, are you? Makes the person feel like, God, if they admit that to you, they're going to be in trouble. And it kind of, it kind of makes it so that you are only expecting a positive answer. You might not have, you want to encourage them to ask you questions, but there are many questions that you're not going to know the answer to. And really admitting that is the most important thing. If there's a question that your child has, offer to, most of the time when they are seeing a therapist, a psychiatrist, any treatment provider, being a child, you would be able to go in. But usually the person sees them alone as well. Talk to them about, maybe when we go to your next appointment, we can ask this, and work on this together. Make it more of a partnership. I think it's just, it's not always easy to have conversations. It's not necessarily a fun thing to have conversations, but I think if you do, you're going to notice things are a lot better off. And, it maintains that relationship between you. The more you are okay talking about these painful subjects, the more they'll feel apt to be able to talk to you and not feel like they're bothering you or they're upsetting you. So, too, there'll be questions about maybe their symptoms as they're going along, or their medications. And it's always a good idea, because there's so much going on as a parent, to write things down. I always say, I do it myself when I see my psychiatrist or therapist. I live with bipolar disorder. I always write things down because I usually forget, and it's something that I want to ask. Write things down, and try to keep, if your child is in treatment and on medication, for instance, try to keep a little bit of a log about, their symptoms and how they're feeling on the medication, or just to kind of have, more background for the provider to know about. This is a really important one. Don't be afraid to ask about suicide. So in a presentation that we do, it's called Ending the Silence, and it's ending the silence surrounding mental illness and suicide. And I didn't talk about that in that other slide, but there are factors of things that you can see and warning signs of people who may be considering suicide. If someone talks about it a lot, it doesn't mean that they want attention. And that's something that we always say to the person who's feeling that, to reach out for help, but also all of us have a responsibility to kind of help each other. So if you're hearing, we always tell kids, if you hear someone say things that make you uncomfortable, go and talk to an adult that you trust. Talk to the people at school that can help with these things. We kind of have to, watch out for each other. And you can see things like someone maybe having an obsession or really big interest in reading about suicide, listening to music, writing about it, maybe, feeling like expressing things like, I don't want to live, or I know I'm just a burden to my family. I just don't want to live like this. Or even giving something away, a possession that's important to them. Those are things that you can kind of look at and say, maybe there might be something going on. But the second point is so important, that people used to think that if you talk to someone about suicide, it's going to cause them to do something. And that is the furthest thing from the truth. So what we always say to the students is, someone might be talking about this and you may say to them, just listening to them, say, I think you should talk to so-and-so, they may be able to help you. And right away they see that you're concerned and you may do something and they're like, no, I'm only kidding. I didn't mean that. Don't tell anybody. You know what? Don't even tell anybody. And that's often the first reaction. So we always say, be really direct and ask the question, are you thinking about suicide? You don't have to skirt around the issue, but just be really, really direct. Again, you may get that first response. If you wait a while and ask it again, maybe, do you have a plan to kill yourself? Sometimes someone will still fluff it off. Nope, I'm fine. I was just being dramatic. But definitely, keep that as something that's important. And that's not something that people would be saying if they were dealing well with things. So it's really, really important to take what someone says. And we always say, you know, someone could be going through, you know, maybe their parents are going through a divorce, and they're having a really hard time. And maybe when they go and talk to a social worker at school, they'll talk about it and they'll talk about how that's affecting them. You know, maybe it's not necessarily a mental health issue, but maybe it is. And so I think just knowing that it's okay to talk about, you know, and I think in talking, since I've been doing this for a long time and talking to students now, yesterday we were at the Met School and just sitting and having conversation, you know, they want to talk about this. They know about this. It's not something that you're keeping from people. And one of the things that they talked about is sometimes being afraid to talk to parents. And so that's why I think it's on us as parents to try to make it easier for them to open up to us. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, I always tell them that's a really good number to have in your phone, because when you need it, you're probably not even going to remember how to look for it. I think as of June, my boss was telling me today that will be a 988 number, so a lot easier to remember. But again, there's someone there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You know, there's always someone there, and they're trained, you know, to deal with this.
Penny?
Yes.
Penny, if you can, let me just remind folks that if they have any questions, please, if you can, for just a reminder for those of you on the call, please use the Q&A at the very bottom of your screen to write in any questions you might have in English or in Spanish. And also, you probably see the 3 dots that say more, where you can press that and you'll probably see reaction. And so when you see the hand, you can go ahead and raise your hand, unless you are able to see a hand. And that's basically saying, you know, raise your hand, and we'll go ahead and call you out based on the name that appears on your video, and we'll ask you to unmute yourself. So please, we want you to ask any questions that you might be thinking of, you know, while we have an expert on the call right now. So Penny, I did have a question. If you can you just do a quick role play in terms of if a parent wants to dial this number? First of all, do we have bilingual staff? Do you know that if a person, you know, calls the number, will they be able to ask for an interpreter?
You know, I don't know that. I'm assuming, but I don't know that, and I can check into that.
Okay. Okay.
But I think it's really good to have, because in a situation, you know, where you really need it, it's just going to be too overwhelming to think of anything else. That's why I'm hoping that in June it gets instituted, that it's 988, and it's a lot easier for people to remember.
So again, that folks, that this number will change from 1-800 to 738-2255. Instead of all those numbers, it will only be 988. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I'm just not sure exactly when. It is supposedly in June, but I'm not quite sure the exact date.
Okay. Okay. And again, you're encouraging folks to use this line. Is it to ask questions, or because you're in a situation at that very moment, call when something is happening that you feel you need to speak to someone?
A couple of things. One is, you know, if you're in a situation with someone, say, you know, you're with a child and they have pills or they have a firearm, or something is in a crisis situation. Obviously, the first thing you would do would be to call 911. But these people are trained. So I would say to have them on the line and explain the situation while this is happening. But also, I think people can, you know, a parent can get information, but I think it's really good to encourage the child. Now, here's another thing, and it's on the last page, but I'll talk about it now. So NAMI has a text line, and kids are very savvy with text, and so many kids don't want to talk on the phone. They just don't feel comfortable talking with a real live person. And so NAMI has a text line. You would text NAMI or text home, it doesn't matter, to 741-741. When I send you this, you'll have it with this PowerPoint, it'll be there. And that's just another way for someone to connect automatically with someone. And again, that's, a 24-hour-a-day thing. But this is something where, because lots of times, everything goes out the window when you're in a situation like this. And, I think obviously the most important thing is getting help and calling 911. But I think, people, they've talked people down and know how to deal with someone that's in a crisis like that. So I just think it's a really good thing, really, for everybody to have access to. One of the things that we talk about, I asked students the other day, I said, what are reasons that you think that people your age would not ask for help? And some of them said, embarrassment. I don't want to, if I admit it, what if I have to go into a hospital and be locked up? What if I have to take medication that they thought would be addictive? I'm afraid to tell my parents. I don't want them to be angry with me. I don't want to think about it, all those things. But one of the things they talked about as well was, different cultures see mental illness in different ways. And a lot of people were saying that it was really not anything they would share with their parents, because the message is kind of that, we don't believe in mental illness, it's not real, or it's the devil, or it's not something that they feel comfortable talking to a parent about. So that's why we like to not only talk to kids, but talk to parents about the fact that, it is real. And a good way to look at it is the longer that it takes, the longer that you let things go, and the child is suffering, the harder it is, and the longer it is until they get treatment. So the younger, the better. I always tell people the story of myself, where I think, I was diagnosed at 22 with bipolar disorder, but I know I suffered in junior high and high school with depression. Never told anyone at that point. No one really talked about mental illness, but my quality of life would have been so much better had I been getting help. And it's in some ways, I say to them, not that you're lucky, but you are lucky that you have so many people to go to. If you go to a guidance counselor, they're not just talking about your grades, or if you want to go to college. So just encouraging people. And I think, we've seen when we've gone to schools and then we go back and I see the same people, the same teachers, and they'll say, there was an influx of kids going to see counselors because we have young adult speakers. Some of them are college age, and in sharing their stories, saying, we're no different from you. So I'm not that much further along than you are in age. And this happened to me, a lot of ways that you may be feeling, but you can get help. So just providing that positive to know that, treatment does work.
And if I can just throw out a question out to our families that are on the call right now. I want you to continue with your presentation, but what I want to do is just put a question in their mind so that they can go ahead and perhaps write a statement or a comment in the Q&A, or raise their hand to respond. For the parents that are on the call right now, you are attending this workshop, I'm thinking, because there was something about it that you felt was important for you to learn more about. So I want to ask you, is it true, what Penny is hearing, right, from the students saying certain things like, well, I don't really want to talk about it because the adults in my home or people around me that are adults are saying that that's not real, right? That you might be thinking a certain way, that this is not real. And so if you think that that is true, we want to hear from you. We want to know why you feel that way. So that way Penny can at least kind of understand why that thinking might exist. And perhaps we can talk about that, briefly, together here. Penny, I know you have more information to share, and that, we might learn more in the other slides that you have for us. So I just wanted to encourage our families that if they're thinking like this, to
Yeah.
please just share so that we can learn from each other.
I think that is a great point. I can just think right on the spot about different examples. A student, when we went to classical high school, this was quite a while back, and she came up to us after the presentation. She didn't feel comfortable sharing in front of the class, but the basic part of the story was that she had been sexually abused by a relative. And we were basically the first people she told, because she said, I know no one would believe me. And I haven't, and she wouldn't even reach out to the counselors at school for fear, that they would tell her family. So, there are so many things that kids can go through. And I think, we're not all therapists. I'm not professional. I just have lived experience, but I know that the best thing that you can do is kind of wrap your arms around them and give them that love and support so that they can feel like they can tell you things.
Yes.
It's really, fortunately in talking, I was talking with a social worker at the med school, and she said, we try to do as much as we can at school in terms of services, but there are times when we need to refer a child out. So that was going to be my next point in asking the kids, what are things that keep you from getting help? Why do you not want to, or what are you afraid of? And one girl stood up, and it was really true what she said. She said, lack of access. She said, my parents have a certain insurance. And she said, when I did get a name, my social worker at school gave me some names of people, and the waiting lists were 10 months long. And what do you do if a child is in a crisis? To have to wait. And then you say, well, okay, then, have them go to Bradley Hospital. The beds are full. So I'm glad we're talking about this, because May is Mental Health Month. So last week was a kickoff at the State House. And we were able to hear about different bills that they're wanting to be passed. And I actually, a bunch of us kind of got together and wrote our reps and senators about a lot of bills. And some of them have to do with not making it so difficult for people to pursue their degrees and take tests or whatever before they become social workers or psychologists, whatever, to make it so that insurance is paying a fair rate like they do maybe for other health concerns. Mental health isn't always reimbursed as well, and providers are not going into the field. People can't afford to go privately. Not many people can pay $150 an hour or more to have their child seen. So those are things that we really have to work on, as well as having access. It's really hard when you're talking about all of this and you're having a student say, I can't get the help now. And so the schools are trying so hard to give that support as much as they can, so that to kind of be there while the person is waiting to get things out in the community. But, it's not an easy fix. It's not an easy thing. But I hope that parents realize that we don't have to feel guilty like it's our fault. You didn't go into your child's brain and create all these differences and all these chemical imbalances. That's not something that you had anything to do with. Yes, it can be genetic, but it doesn't mean it always is. And it doesn't mean that you can't get help to fix this. But I think parents sometimes get stuck with, if I don't think about it and talk about it, it'll go away. And I think that's very unfair to the child. And it also sends a message to them that, well, if I don't think about it, it'll go away. And not only are kids that are dealing with mental health issues, but on top of that, there's a lot of substance use and alcohol where they call it self-medicating. So the person does not like how they're feeling. They don't understand it. It's uncomfortable, it's painful. And so a quick fix of feeling nothing and feeling numb seems like it'll work really well. That only introduces another problem when we talk about how, alcohol's a depressant, many drugs are depressants. And we talk about how then that creates another issue, a dual diagnosis that you have to deal with those two things. So I think it's really important to get out in front of it and encourage talk about it. And even if you're talking to your children and they don't have a mental illness, it's really good for them to understand, because at some point in their lives, they may. 1 in 5 people will deal with a mental illness themselves or know someone, a family or a friend that deals with it. So, it's good for all of us to know. And so when you talk about self-care, I think the biggest way to impress self-care upon your children is to practice it ourselves and lead by example. So, it might sound very simplistic. I say that to them all the time. I know you guys don't get enough sleep. I know you stay up with your phones and the light is on and you're up half the night. But sleep is a time when your body can regenerate. And, we talk about how even putting your phone, away from you and, just using it for an alarm or just to realize, like, when you get a good night's sleep, how much better you feel. Talking about eating, because really what we eat has everything to do with our moods. Exercising. Now, everyone doesn't want to go to the gym, but there's nothing wrong with a walk. There's something about self-care and being out in nature. It doesn't mean, people garden, people walk in the woods. There's something about that. And self-care can also be learning a positive coping skill, learning yoga, learning deep breathing, learning, and we talk about this a lot, and kids know about this, about mindfulness. And basically what we talk about is if they're having an issue, say they're sitting in class and their anxiety is so high and they feel like they have to run out and go to the nurse. One of the tools of mindfulness can be this exercise of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, focus on 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear. And basically all it is encouraging someone to use their senses, so that they call it grounding, so that while you are doing that, you're not focusing on all the negative swirling around in your head, and you're focusing on what's happening right now at the present time. So those are things that you can use to help yourself. And so another thing too, and this can go either way, but it's a good thing if family members can be supportive and encouraging to a child, and educating them and encouraging people to read about and be educated about mental illness. A child can often feel a lot of shame, but in feeling like there's that support, they may feel a little bit less ashamed and not wanting to isolate as much. However, it's often the case where you're not getting a lot of support from family, and people have a big stigma against it, and will often say things that are really hurtful to the child. So if you're seeing that with certain family members, that's something that you don't necessarily want to encourage them to be around. But the other thing too is never to keep this a secret. We tell people that, we tell kids that all the time. I don't care if someone or if your child says to you, like they would to a friend, don't say anything, I didn't mean it. Please don't call the doctor. Please don't tell dad. Please don't, please don't, please don't. You have to break that trust. If you were at a therapist's office and you said anything about wanting to hurt yourself or someone else, they have to take that seriously. So we want to kind of bring that out into the light, and encourage self-care, because treatment For some people is medication. For some people it's therapy. For some people it's one or both. For some people it's a lot of using tools, positive coping skills, and sleep and exercise. And one of the things too is that people often want to isolate when they're not feeling well. So one of the biggest things that we encourage with people is, as you're in treatment, to engage with other people. And that was one of the hard things during COVID, when there was no engagement, no connection, which was a really hard thing. And also, some kids felt in their situations safe at school, and they were not allowed to be there in that safe place. So, but I think it's just really important to know that there are ways to manage mental illness. It is not a death sentence. It doesn't mean you can't have a good life. It just means, though, that you do have to acknowledge it and face it. That's the most important piece.
Penny, I just wanted to read off a comment that a parent
Yes.
shared on the Q&A.
Yes.
She says, I'm attending this workshop because my grandson was diagnosed with anxiety disorder, executive function, and ADHD. He's had a lot of tragedy in life, and I want to be aware of the signs to look for. He's on medication and is going to counseling at school.
That's a really good thing. And I think one of the things too that you might see, I'm not sure how old he is, but one of the things that you might see with anxiety, kids can act really differently at home than they do at school. Sometimes they hold it together in school and then they fall apart at home, or vice versa. But lots of times you might see with anxiety a lot of becoming very emotional in terms of, I only got an 80 on a test and not a 95, and kind of breaking down, like things of trying to be perfect, of wanting everything to be just so, and putting a lot of pressure on themselves. And feeling like, it's that feeling like something's going to happen and it's going to be bad, and that's why there are a lot of things like what I mentioned, but there are things for anxiety that you can do. Everyone has anxieties, and we're not saying that we never will, but it's when it gets to a point where sometimes you don't even know why you're anxious. And if he's had trauma, that's something that needs to be brought out and dealt with, because I, through my work at NAMI, know adults who are just now dealing with trauma that they never dealt with. And it is causing a real problem, because it's something that they thought, if I just don't think about it, type thing. So it's really good. I'm glad to hear that he's getting help and getting counseling. That's a good thing. So what I wanted to mention too was we have things at NAMI. We have supports. And I really encourage family members with these. So we have NAMI family support groups. They're designed for just the family member to go, not the person with the illness. And it's a place to, yes, to be able to vent, to be able to talk with people that you don't have to explain yourself to, and to actually sit and listen to someone that you think it's you talking. And there's something to be said about being part of a group where you can feel that way. Even though you may be there because of your grandson's ADHD and anxiety and executive functioning, someone else might have someone in their life with bipolar disorder. It doesn't matter, because a lot of those underlying things are the same. So they're facilitated, because they're not a class, it's a support group, by people who are also family members. They occur on the second Tuesday of every month at 6, and on the third Tuesday of every month at 6:30. And if you contact us at NAMI, we can send you a link, because everything right now is on Zoom. So that's something that I think is just so important for people. We also have, which I really like, I encourage people with this. No one who has taken this family to family class has ever not liked it. Again, everything we offer is free. So they've toned it down. It used to be 12 weeks, shorten the duration. It's an 8-session, 8-week program. And So it's not a support group as much as it is an educational thing. So there are lessons on the brain, medications, how they work, all the different illnesses, things like how to talk to your loved one who deals with mental illness, how to talk to them in a way that you can really communicate and not offend, how to take care of yourself, how to set limits and boundaries. So while you're learning about it, you're also getting the benefit of the group wisdom of people who have tried things and it worked or didn't work. So you really learn how to take care of yourself and communicate more effectively with that family member in your life. So these two things are so important. These are the family to family. We have them periodically throughout the year, but the support groups are every week. And, you know, for some people, they don't have people they can share with. Either family members don't understand mental illness or don't want to, or friends give them a hard time. So it's just a really good, safe place to be able to be. This, I think, is really great class to take. So I did this. This is online. And once you register, you have as much time as you want to be able to take it. It's called NAMI Basics. So it's at your own pace. It provides so much information. It covers, you know, medications, the different illnesses, you know, kids' developmental stages, treatment options, the school and the mental health system, the juvenile justice system, how to be an advocate for rights that your child should have, how to respond to a crisis situation. And again, just like the family to family class, the importance of taking care of yourself. These are things that even though you will hear similar things in each of them, they each have importance in their own way. And the way I see it is, I want to have as much information as I can about something to make me feel more comfortable in dealing with it. And in talking to other people, you learn more. We talked to the police. We just did a few weeks ago. And I think it helps them do their job better when they hear from people with lived experience. So, you know, I feel like we need to kind of all come together and help each other. And these are really good tools to do that. I don't love Zoom in terms of, I'd love to be in front of people and having conversation face to face, but I do like it in things like support groups and classes, because I think that it's more convenient for people. And I think we will continue to run things on Zoom as well as in person, because I think it does, some people do like it. So that's another really good thing to take. So this is our information. They have what they call Kids Link. It's part of BH Link. It's a place where if someone is in a crisis situation, you could go, you can stay for no more than 24 hours, but it's basically to be able to link you to go somewhere, find resources of where the person could go from there. Our website has a wealth of information from articles to stories to what we're doing to what's going on in the field of mental health. And I can't tell you, I'm usually not on the phone. I'm usually out at schools, but when I'm not, I'm in the office. And so I answer the phone. And I never realized this, but I can't tell you in the past month, call after call, our family members crying, not knowing where to go, wanting information. So, you know, it's out there. And I think if we can get to this and talk about it when kids are younger, it's only going to help make their quality of life better. You know, I'm just a firm believer in arming yourself with as much information as possible. And so people say, what do I do to get someone to get help? You know, it's a little easier when someone's under 18, you know, you can take them to get help. But I think it's really important to just understand that while we know that someone's having a hard time and we can see it, sometimes having the illness, it's called anosognosia. So it's kind of like you don't have insight when you're dealing with an illness and you're not in treatment. So sometimes you might think to yourself as the family, well, all right, I'm saying you want to get help. What's wrong? Why? And sometimes it's just the inability to have the insight that we do need help. So, you know, it's a scary thing. I will share that I was very ill when my daughter was a baby. And I actually had to have my mom come and live with us. I never took her outside in the carriage. I just couldn't function. And, you know, I finally decided, you know, 20 years ago, you are going to stay on medication and not do this nonsense. And I never realized when she was an adolescent, she tells me now that she had a great deal of anxiety and that's why she couldn't sleep. And here I am, and I missed it. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, sometimes we just have to open our eyes. I know we're afraid of what the answer might be if we ask the question, but we still have to have the courage to ask it, you know, and I think when you think about it, you'd want to be the person that your child comes to. And I don't think we have to think in terms of, now I let the cat out of the bag and everybody's life is going to be miserable. No, it's difficult. It doesn't mean it's not going to be difficult, but you can only move forward when you ask for help, you know, and get the treatment. And I think you can be a role model in showing them that it's okay to do that. Some parents are in therapy themselves, you know, I think there's nothing wrong with sharing that. And again, when someone is telling you something and the child is sharing something with you, try not to say, oh, but you're okay, right? You don't mean you're really bad. Try to listen. And again, I think we hear 99.9% of the time, but we only listen a very little part, you know, because we may not want to hear, but it's really important to be open and to encourage those conversations. So I don't know if people have any more questions. I could talk all night about this and about the kids that I meet, and the ones that are brave enough to stand up in class and talk about their suicide attempts and talk about their medications and therapies to help their friends. And it's just amazing, you know, the strength.
Penny, there aren't any questions on here right now, but I wanted to ask you, just to inform the families that are on the call right now, what might be some reasons that you've learned in the past year and a half or two of why the increase of suicide? What might be the reasons that children under, you know, under 18 are committing suicide? Just to give some insight to our families that are on the call.
So the real reason, one of the reasons, like I said, is lack of connection. So when you take someone who never had issues with depression, maybe, or anxiety, and you have them be in the same space, all of a sudden, not interacting with friends or even other family, maybe having a death in their family due to COVID, maybe a family member losing a job, maybe worrying about the financial insecurity, not having that stability and that schedule of here I'm going here, I know I'm going to do this, I know I'm going to see my gym teacher, you know, having that consistency. But the lack of connectedness is huge. And, you know, when you spend more and more time alone, it's easier to get stuck inside your head, you know, and something that's bothering you can become bigger and bigger and snowball to a point of, you know, that's all you're thinking about. When you're able to be in different situations and with other people, you know, you bounce things off of them. And it's just, it was a very, just unprecedented time where people didn't know what to do. And, you know, I talked to kids who did not do well on Zoom in school and had a hard time. And, you know, maybe a lot of kids were turning their cameras off and not wanting to be involved. Maybe they were having a hard time. Lots of kids told me, you know, they did not do well. They do not learn well that way. They needed to have a teacher in front of them. So there was a lot of stress, feeling like, you know, they didn't, I mean, we're talking about, I was talking to 9th and 10th graders that, you know, they missed, or 10th and 11th, they missed 9th, 10th grade. I mean, they've missed so much. They've gone from junior high to high school without those same feelings and things going on. People that miss graduations. I mean, it's been, I say to them all the time, it's going to be in the history books, and it's unbelievably difficult what they've had to go through, but there's been a huge increase in people with these issues, especially depression, anxiety since COVID. And I think that does have something to do with having a hard time getting services, because so many more people are seeking services.
Mhm. And I have one more question. There still isn't any other question on here, but one more question for me. How do you, or when do you, a parent should involve a pediatrician? Should it be the first, aside from 911 if it's very extreme, but when do you think of talking to your pediatrician?
So that's a good point. So one of my speakers, in her story, that's what happens. So this was when she was done with college, but she all of a sudden couldn't go to her job, couldn't get out of bed. And I think people think, why can't you get out of bed, put your feet on the floor? It's a feeling of being so overwhelmed and so like you can't face anything. And so her mother, who had similar feelings, took her to see the pediatrician. And she said it was good in a way because it was a doctor that she knew who could then refer her to a psychiatrist and a therapist. But it was good to go to someone that knew her, about her since she was younger. And so that was kind of a good segue into getting help. So that's a really good resource, is a pediatrician. School resources are the best resources. And it doesn't mean, you know, the other thing too is it doesn't mean, you know, you're connecting with a resource and the next day you're going to go to CVS and get a red pill and everything's going to be great. That's not usually how it works. Things take time. There's a lot of trial and error. But I think just showing and constantly reinforcing that when you're on the road and into treatment, you know, treatment works. Sometimes it takes patience, but it does work. And trying to close your eyes and will it away does not work. So I think the kids really need to see that their parents aren't upset by this, or maybe they feel like they'd be angry with them, that they can feel from their parents' support. Like, I may not understand a lot of this. I want to learn more about this, but I am here. I want you to feel free to talk to me. We can do this together. I remember being told that by a therapist once, we can do this together. And that's what I needed to hear because I felt so overwhelmed. So I just think that a lot of these things people know, but I think to really take the time to think about it, you're going to be saving kids a lot of extra heartache that they don't need to have the earlier you can get involved.
Okay.
And again, people can always call us at NAMI with any concerns, ask for any resources. But again, that text line I think is a really good one too, because kids tend to like to text.
So I'm asking everyone on the call now that if you want to take a picture of this screen, so that way you can at least have the information ready and available, including the website that's on here and the numbers and the address. Okay. So Penny, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes, this has been very helpful. I feel that the parents on the call as well feel the same. Thank you again. And please, I will keep in touch with you for next year.
Please do.
Yes, for our following year. And, you know, think through, you know, what might be some of the topics that parents might be interested in. I will get that information from folks that are on the call now. And so again, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your expertise.
Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you.